Hey, y'all. Hi. Hey, how are ya? Are you good? I hope you're well. I'm chilling. I'm chilling like a villain. We've arrived. Okay. This is season 2, episode 20 of I Swear to Drunk I'm Not God. And thank you so much for enjoying this podcast. If you enjoyed it, of course. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble and listening to me tell all my fucking business and listening to me tell these awful, awful stories. I appreciate every single one of you. Okay. Thank you. And I also want to give a shout out to all of my beautiful guests who've been on the show, from Lauren Diamond to Dustin Maynard to Sal Carmona to Kira Perkins. And I'm very, very grateful for the beautiful episodes that they did with me. And I'm saying beautiful loosely because we were talking about some foul and very fucked up shit. And so this is the final episode of season 2. And as most of you know, I will not be back until Halloween, which should be fun. I think it'll be fun. I just got to do what I got to do to make sure that happens. You know what I mean? Because I tend to say shit and then be like, see what happened was, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We don't want to go into season 3 like that, Also, I'm recording this on 9/11. So today we honor the memory of those lost and the resilience of those who survived. And you all are forever in our hearts this very, very heavy day. So we stand with you in remembrance. We're sending our love and thoughts to the family and the friends and the victims. We'll never forget the sacrifices made, and we'll continue to move forward with compassion and kindness and hope. We're also in the middle of a very, very, very divisive presidential election, and Kamala 2024 all day over here. You hear me? Oh, okay, chill. And so I hope you all vote in November and do what you got to do to save our democracy, because we are in fucking trouble. You hear me? All right. So there's that. Now on to the topic. Now, who are we talking about today? Who are we talking about today? Dun, 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 dun. We are talking about Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. Now, you probably heard of him. You may not have. If you have not heard of Rodney Alcala, sit down, get your drink. What is the poison today? You may be asking. The poison today is the Old Cuban. Okay, the Old Cuban is rum, Angostura bitters, lime juice, simple syrup, and mint leaves, and a little bit of champagne. Okay, we about to get lit up in this bitch. Okay, this is the last episode, so let's actually get drunk. So if you want to drink with me, that's what you need. The recipe for the Old Cuban is 2 ounces of champagne, 1.5 ounce of rum, 1 ounce of simple syrup, 3/4 ounce of lime juice, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters, 6 mint leaves. You muddle those mint leaves with the simple syrup and the lime juice in a shaker. You combine the rum and bitters with ice, and then you shake the ingredients until it's chilled, and then you double strain, meaning using 2 strainers, because you muddle in mint leaves and you don't want to suck those down. And then you strain those into a coupe glass. You top it with a little champagne. You got yourself a motherfucking Old Cuban. Sip. Mm. All right. Now that I clear my throat and the mic, let's do this. The dating game killer Rodney Alcala was an American serial killer and rapist, and he was active primarily in the 1970s. For this episode, I read The Dating Game Killer, the true story of a TV dating show, a violent sociopath, and a series of brutal murders by Stella Sands. Okay. Very good book. Excuse me. Duh. Of course I got a hock up a loogie in the mic. No, that is that's the book I read. The book was very, very good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, and wait, before I even go, this is my last episode, and you're probably like, "Damn, bitch, you by yourself." Yes, I am. People got other shit to do. Here's the reality. My sister, I know so many people wanted her, but my sister is so working. Like, she works 6 days a week. You hear me? She works 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. I told you, she's Jamaican. She always working. Okay. And so she couldn't do the episode. Dustin couldn't do the episode. He's in school. He's working. People got shit to do. Okay. People got shit to do. So I'm doing this by myself. I'm sorry, but I'm doing this by myself. But we're gonna get back to the old ways. We're gonna get back to the old ways with just me and you. You know what I mean? Like, why you want to bring somebody else into this is my question. Is this relationship not good enough for you? Like, you don't want just me? You want multiple motherfuckers? Like, what are we talking about? Like, I thought we were cooler than that. I need to get some water though. As per usual, I'm going to start from the very beginning as it pertains to Rodney Alcala. It's deep. It's going to be heavy. I'm going to make this nice for you because I'm not coming back until Halloween. And I do have an episode for you. I've been Easter egging it for a while. It's come up before in past episodes. And I know that I'm going to be gone for like a month and a half. So I'm going to just say this. Just go back. Right? Just go back and listen to those episodes. Fuck it. It's okay. You just go back and listen to them again. It's fine. It's fine. I listen to my episodes all the time. I love the sound of my voice. So there's that. Sip. All right. Let's talk about Rodney. Now, we're going to start from the beginning. Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Burco. Ooh. What? I'm tripping. He was born on August 23rd, 1943 in San Antonio, Texas, to Ana Maria Gutierrez and Raúl Alcala Burco Sr. Ooh, that tongue, you hear me. He was one of four. He was the third born. They were a middle-class Mexican-American family. I mean, he attended St. Joseph's Catholic Elementary School. He moved on to Mount Sacred Heart, which was a private Catholic school. Alcala was an excellent student. His intelligence was above average. By the 1950s, Alcala's grandmother would fall ill and asked to relocate to Mexico. Alcala's mother had a strong relationship with her mother. So she packed up the family and they moved. And they still had a great life. Different, but still great. Alcala would enroll in a private school there and do very well. Shortly after this move, grandma passed away and his father left the family, and moved back to the United States. And after 3 years, when Alcala was 11, the father or the family moved back to the United States, settling in Los Angeles. Now, Alcala was enrolled in yet another Catholic school for elementary school and for high school. He was tired of it. He was tired of going to Catholic schools. He begged his mother to enroll him in public school. And she did. She did. And he attended Montebello High School and graduated in 1960. Now, in school, Alcala was very popular. He played the piano. He was in cross country. After graduating, Alcala decided to join the Army and entered a program leading him to North Carolina, where he served as a clerk in the Army. Now, by 1962, Alcala's father would pass away. Even though he left the family and remarried, Alcala attended the funeral with his siblings. He seemed to not really care either way about his father leaving the house, but all the kids were extremely upset when Raul died. Then, in 1964, Alcala just showed up at his mother's house. He went AWOL. His mother was not happy about this and asked that he turn himself in, and he did, which is like, that's very righteous of her. She's like, motherfucker, you cannot do this. And so his mother figured, you know, his mother was not happy about any of what he was doing. And now his mother figured he'd be okay eventually because, you know, they were trying to get him some help because apparently he had had a nervous breakdown. Now, when Alcala was interviewed by the Army psychiatrist, he was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, chronic and severe. Chronic and severe. Now, I was a person that thought that chronic and severe were the same thing, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I guess chronic just means that it's persistent, it's everlasting, and severe is like, that shit is real. You know what I mean? Severe is like, it's fucking bad. So not only is it bad, it is also long term. So, you know, he ain't really, not that the elevator ain't going up to the top, because he's definitely a smart guy. But he got some issues somewhere. His psychological profile is not great. Now, Alcala had apparently had an anxiety attack leading to him being hospitalized, and they even told him that he needed psychological help. And in February 1964, Alcala was discharged. After leaving, Alcala would attend UCLA School of Fine Arts, where he studied with hopes of becoming a photographer. He graduated in 1968. He had an IQ of 160. It's very interesting how a lot of these motherfuckers are always so incredibly smart, because we already know there's a fine line between genius and insanity. They say it all the time, but you know, this isn't, of course, not the first person. Like Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper was another serial killer that I did, who had an incredibly high IQ, was extremely articulate, loved talking about himself, loved talking about his crimes. Go back to that episode and listen if you haven't listened to Ed Kemper, because he was a very interesting one. And I actually equate Rodney Alcala a little bit to Ed Kemper in the fact that I feel like even though they're popular amongst the true crime, like serial killer culture or whatever, he's not widely known like the way Ted Bundy is, and the way that what's the one, Dahmer was. But Ed Kemper is another one who was extremely intelligent. And part of that intelligence is, it's kind of what makes these types of crimes fun for them, because they always feel like they can outsmart the police. Now, Rodney Alcala's IQ was 160. Ed Kemper's IQ was 145. So both of them are pretty fucking smart. Now, in September of 1968, Alcala was driving around LA being a fucking asshole, aka looking for someone to rape and kill, when he stopped. Yeah, this escalated. When he stopped 8-year-old Tali Shapiro. Now, first of all, non sequitur. Tali Shapiro is a dope ass fucking name. I just want to start off by saying that. Like, that's a cool ass fucking name. Now, Tali Shapiro is staying at the Chateau Marmont with her family. Now, I needed to look up that hotel because I have literally heard that name 700 times and I've never looked into its significance, which I know, surprising. Quote, the hotel is known as both a long and short-term residence for celebrities, historically populated by people either on their way up or on their way down, as well as a home for New Yorkers in Hollywood. The hotel has 63 rooms, suites, cottages, and bungalows. And I wanted to look this up because I couldn't wrap my mind around why this child lived in a hotel. It's like, what is this? Now, Tali was 8, but responsible, and she would wake up early and she would walk to school every day instead of taking the bus. She didn't like to take the bus. So she runs into Alcala's bitch ass. He pulls up alongside her He asked her if she needs a ride to school. She knew she wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, but he said he knew her parents. Then he says, I have a beautiful picture to show you. Then she asks, when school start? He asks, when does school start? And then she says, whatever the time was. And then that's when he says, there's time for you to see the poster. It's psychedelic of forests and trees. So Tali hopped in. This was September 25th, 1968. Now, Donald Haynes was on his way to work when he spotted a young girl hop in a car with a man, and he just felt like something was up. So he called the police. Now, something about the interaction between the child and the driver just didn't really sit right with him. He followed the vehicle to an apartment complex, and he stayed until an officer arrived. Officer Camacho had just returned to work after being shot, and this was his first day back. He walks over to Haynes's car and assures him that even if it wasn't a big deal, he did the right thing. Now, Camacho approaches the apartment, knocks on the door. Police officer, open the door. Nothing. LAPD, open the door. Alcala says, hey, give me a sec. Just got out the shower. Now, to the officer, the man looked naked. Naked, but not wet. So Camacho asked again for Alcala to open the door. Nothing. He called for backup. He kicked it down. Camacho saw a ton of photography equipment and photographs of young girls. Then he saw a trail of blood. Tali was lying naked on the floor and her head was bashed in. A metal bar, similar to a dumbbell, was lying across her neck, and her legs were spread apart, and in between them was a pool of blood. Camacho would say that he thought that Tali was dead, but when he removed the bar from her neck and checked her pulse, he could feel a faint pulse. He called an ambulance, and by the time he kicked in the door, Alcala had slipped out the fucking back. Sip. Now, Alcala had bludgeoned Tali, strangled her, and brutally raped her. But she fucking survived. She was in a coma for 32 days. The only saving grace was 1, Camacho removed the dumbbell from her throat. 2, Tali didn't remember any of the attack beyond the initial hit to the head. Now, surprisingly to me, which only speaks to the serendipitousness of this podcast, Steve Hodel, and you'll hear me say his name again, gets assigned to the case to track him down. Actually, you've actually heard me mention Steve Hodel already. Steve Hodel was an LAPD detective, and I mentioned him in the Gene Spangler episode that I did this season because his father was possibly associated with Gene Spangler's death as well as the death of the Black Dahlia. Yeah? Remember I said I wanted to talk about him? Okay. So he learned, Steve Hodel, that he was a UCLA student from the neighbors. But in Alcala's rush, of course, he left behind his student fucking ID. Now, Alcala's a fugitive. Alcala flees to New York, y'all, and enrolls in NYU under the name John Berger. Even though Berger was enrolling in the middle of a semester, the admissions chairman was pretty impressed because, Alcala's smart as fuck. He was accepted into the undergrad school of arts, and one of his instructors was none other than Roman Polanski. Now, if you don't know who Roman Polanski is, they're kind of the same ilk. Let me explain. Roman Polanski is a Polish-French film director. He's also an actor. He was known for his work as the director of a beautiful fucking horror film called Rosemary's Baby. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. 1968 psychological horror classic. He also did Chinatown in 1974, starring Jack Nicholson, a beautiful neo-noir film. His films often explore dark, disturbing psychological themes. And he's won a shit ton of awards. In 2002, he actually won the Academy Award for Best Director for The Pianist. And you're probably like, Brittany, but you said that they're of the same ilk. What that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. Polanski's career had been overshadowed by a bunch of legal issues because in 1977, he was arrested and charged with sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl. Her name was Samantha Geimer in Los Angeles. He initially pleaded guilty for unlawful sex with a minor as part of the plea deal, but before sentencing, Polanski fled the U.S. To avoid imprisonment, and has lived in exile, primarily in France, which does not extradite its citizens. So despite attempts by the U.S. government to extradite him over the years, he managed to continue his career directing films and winning awards. Pianist was a great movie, though, but he is a piece of shit. I wish I could remember the documentary that I read on him. Maybe one day I'll do an episode on him. So he's learning with the best and the worst. Now, even though Polanski's crimes had not happened yet, I wonder if they bonded over pedo shit, you know? I mean, you know, birds of a feather flock together. Now, while he's at NYU, he took a job as an art counselor in New Hampshire. And then June 1971, Michael Crilly. Her name was actually Cornelia, but people called her Michael, which I actually think is a really cute girl name. I like unisex names. There was a very brief period where I wanted to be called Marlo. And I had a couple of friends that were like trying to shift me into Marlo. It didn't stick. And I tried to be called Morgan for a minute because originally my mom said that I was named after a soap opera actress by the name of Morgan Brittany. And so I was like, oh, I wouldn't mind being called Morgan. So then I tried to be called Morgan. That didn't stick. You know, I was always trying to get away from Brittany because Brittany is just like, as soon as you hear Brittany, you're like, oh, that bitch was born in the 80s, you know? And so, and two, I just wanted a name that was just like, that I felt like suited my personality more. But now that I've like leaned into Brit, I feel like Brit is a good, anyway, this isn't about me. Now, Cornelia Crilly, Michael. She was a 23-year-old flight attendant, and she was moving into her new Yorkville section of Brooklyn apartment with friends in what they called the Girl Belt. So the Girl Belt was named this because a number of like flight attendants and secretaries and working women, they all lived in this area. Now, her mom had not heard from her in several hours, and asked her coworker at the Brooklyn DA's office, Borstein, if he could check on her daughter at her new apartment once he got off work. And needless to say, things don't end well. He decided to contact the police because Borstein got over to Michael's place, but nobody answered. So he asked them, he said, yo, could you all escort me? You know, it's just a courtesy call, but could you escort me? Cause, you know, I went over there. She's not answering. I don't know what's going on. So the cops arrived. There was no signs of a break-in. And after a few attempts, they decided to break in where they found a body in the second bedroom. She was lying on her back, a stocking tied around her neck, her garments stuffed in her mouth, and saliva and bite marks on her breasts. Now, her face and body show signs of trauma as well as sexual assault. And after her death, TWA offered a $5,000 reward on information, and the Professional Airline Stewardess Association, they offered $1,000. 20,000 members got together and donated and accumulated, which I'm like, $1,000, but okay, whatever. Whatever. Now, her case eventually went cold. Alcala had been in Manhattan at the time photographing women and young girls. So, you know, meanwhile in LA, Steve Hodel was getting the FBI to add Alcala to the FBI's most wanted list. He figured a national manhunt would help track down this fugitive. And eventually something had to hit and someone would recognize him. Now, Alcala was back in New Hampshire enjoying his third year as counselor when one of the girls at the camp noticed the list posted in a post office. And one of the images looked a lot like John. They alerted the camp director. He looked at the image and thought that it couldn't possibly be John. This man was named Rodney Alcala, and he's wanted for a heinous crime in LA. And as far as he knew, John had always lived in New York. So he studied the photo and he finally called the FBI, and the FBI told him to just chill, act completely normal. And when he returned to work, tell the girls, don't speak to him. Don't wander off alone with him. So the next morning, they arrested Alcala. Holder was contacted, and he hopped on the first thing fucking smoking to the East Coast. And when he arrived on August 21st, 1971, he finally met him and asked him why he did what he did to Tolly. And he said this: I don't want to talk about Rod Alcala and what he did. Like, you're not him, bitch. Sip. Now I think Luna just hit her head on the desk.
You okay, pushy cat?
I think she couldn't cuss.
Hold on, baby. You okay? You hit your head. I know.
She hit her head on the desk. Hold on.
Okay, pushy cat. Yeah, girl.
All right, she's had a rough week. Now, by May of 1972, Alcala was charged with child molestation. He was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He pleaded guilty. They didn't want to go to trial, so the prosecutors arranged a plea deal because Tolly's family had moved to Puerto Vallarta after the assault, and they didn't really want to drag them through it. So, his sentence was indeterminate, meaning he received a range of like 1 to 10 years. And in August of 1974, a state psychiatrist said that he improved and recommended his release. He paroled in LA County and had to register as a sex offender. He only served 3 years. On his first day out, he got a job as a photographer to take photos in stores in South LA. So on October 13th, while in Huntington Beach, Alcala spotted another 8-year-old girl at a shopping center. Not learning anything from his last stint in prison, he asked the girl if she wanted a ride, and then promised to show her his posters. He told her his name was John Ronald. Her name was Julie Johnson. And they rolled on. And Julie, thinking that he's taking her to school until, they passed the school. And he told her that, I got to make a quick stop at my apartment. So she started to get scared. And he yelled at her, sit still. And so she started to scream. And he told her, shut up. Like, he gets frustrated like that. And so Julie tried to get out of the car. And when the car finally stopped, she tried to run. He took her to the bluffs at Huntington Beach. He made her sit and smoke weed with him. Then he wrapped his arms around her and tried to fucking kiss her. Gross. Now, a park ranger spotted them on the bluff, and he smelled the weed. And when he asked them what they were up to, Alcala claimed that Julie had given him the weed, but Julie told the ranger that she was taken against her will and wanted to go home. Now, originally, the officer figured, young girls sometimes get caught with older men and claim kidnapping to avoid getting in trouble, but he took the more righteous approach. He ran their names. Julie had no record, but Alcala was on parole. And on December 26, 1974, Alcala was found guilty of violating parole and providing a minor with drugs. He went back to jail. This time, he served 2.5 years at Chino and then at California's Men's College colony in San Luis Obispo. Now, Alcala would be paroled again in 1977, but he had to report to his PO every fucking week. Alcala would eventually be free after begging his PO to allow him to go to New York. He was also able to go to Chicago. He was also able to go to DC, but he really had his sights set on New York. Then on July 13th, 1977, New York was experiencing a major fucking blackout, and Ellen Hover, 23, was spotted outside her apartment talking to a tall, thin man with a ponytail. She had told a friend that he was a photographer, and 2 days later, the same man knocked on her door. That same evening, Ellen missed a dinner date, and she never called her parents like she would normally do. Now, Ellen was an heiress. She was the goddaughter of Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin because her father, Herman Hover, was a very prestigious nightclub owner. He owned this club called Cirrus's in Hollywood. She was a young, rich socialite living in the big city. Near her stepfather and her mother, though, they lived in New York. So they weren't going to give up the pursuit. They were going to fucking find out what happened to her. And when the police arrived at her apartment, there were no signs of a break-in. So, of course, they're thinking something was up. But unfortunately, if something nefarious happened, the body was missing. Ellen's family issued a $100,000 reward for her whereabouts, and they did have a lead. Ellen's husband, Reuben Schwartz, learned that Ellen had written, quote, John Berger photographer in her journal, and he hired a PI to locate him. The PI was able to confirm that Ellen had been seen with that man outside of her apartment. Schwartz then placed the ad in the New York Times to anyone that saw her. Unfortunately, her investigation was interrupted by none other than the Son of Sam fucking murders. Now, the Son of Sam murders, Son of Sam was a nickname given to David Berkowitz. He was an American serial killer who terrorized New York during the 1970s. My fucking mother was terrified of him. Between 1976 and 1977, Berkowitz murdered 6 people and wounded 7. He primarily targeted like young women and couples parked in cars. His weapon of choice was a .44 caliber bulldog revolver. And that's how he got the nickname, the .44 caliber killer, before he started calling himself Son of Sam. Now, his case became super infamous, not only for the brutal nature of the killings, but also for the fucking fear he instilled on New York during the summer of 1977. Spike Lee actually did a movie called Summer of Sam about him. And by August, they doubled down on trying to track down John Berger, but nothing, because they were, by the time they got through the Summer of Sam shit, it was like, okay, well, we should probably like speed up the John Berger thing, because we kind of threw the John Berger thing to the side. But in the interim, Rodney Alcala, who is John Berger, returned to LA. And by September, he was looking for another job. He found one at the LA Times. Could you fucking believe it? So at the LA Times, Alcala would share pictures of young girls as part of his portfolio, claiming that they were pictures authorized by their parents. He was always sharing these like lewd pictures of his coworkers, and they were just like, oh, he's artsy fartsy, kind of eccentric, the Greenwich Village type. And then in November of 1977, Jill Barkham, an 18-year-old from New York, went missing, but she went missing in California. Now, the problem here was that Jill had left home before, and she had just showed back up at home one day, having been to California by herself, and her family just felt like she wanted to claim her independence, so they didn't make any fuss about it. That's the weird thing about all of these like 1960s, 90s, 1970s cases where so many people hitchhiked and so many people were just like, I just want my independence. So they go off and do some shit and don't nobody know about it and end up dead. I mean, that's like a huge issue with that time period. Now, unfortunately, Jill was found on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in LA. She was lying on all fours. Her knees were bent, no underwear. There was blood smear on her sweater. There was blood on her legs. Her pant leg was soaked in blood. There was blood around her head. and a large rock found covered in blood. According to the court documents, quote, she had a bloody bite mark on the nipple of her right breast, as well as serious injuries to and conspicuous bleeding from the anus. Finally, she had been strangled in 3 different ways: with a belt buckle, with knee-high hose and pantyhose, and with one of the legs to the pants that she had been wearing. Her body was found in a position that appeared to be posed, kneeling, with legs spread out and with her genitalia exposed. Originally, she was a Jane Doe, and it wasn't until a juvenile record pull from an arrest linked her identity via fingerprint. Now, remember, Alcala is working for the LA Times. The LAPD get a call from the FBI in December of 1977 that John Berger, was actually an alias for Rodney Alcala. So they picked him up and they take him to the station and they ask him about Ellen Hover's whereabouts. He admits that he knew her and that he was with her the day that she went missing, but claimed he had absolutely no idea what happened to her. And when they asked Alcala if he would take a polygraph, he refused. And even though he was suspicious as fuck, they couldn't do anything because there was no body. So they let him go. That same month, December, Georgia Wickstead, 27, a nurse living alone, gave her friend Barbara Gale a ride from the bar in the early morning. Gale expected to see Wickstead at work the following day, but when she didn't show up, authorities went to her Malibu apartment and found the door was unlocked. Inside, they found her dead on the bedroom floor. She was lying on her back, mostly naked, with only a sweater and top pulled up around her shoulders. A nylon stocking was tightly wrapped around her neck, leaving really deep marks, and she had been strangled and suffered severe head injuries, likely from a fucking claw hammer. Now, her face had been struck and her genitals were mutilated. There was lacerations on her vagina and labia. Her arm was fractured and dislocated. Her apartment showed signs of forced entry with her purse was empty. Her purse had been emptied in the bathroom, which, her drawers were ransacked. So he's kind of trying to throw them off as if she had been robbed. Investigators took swabs of sperm from the vaginal, anal, and oral cavities and lifted a palm print from the bed's railing. Now, as we talked about episodes ago, California was lit in the 1970s. And in this season alone, we talked about Richard Chase. First episode I did with Dustin. We did part 1, part 2 of The Vampire of Sacramento. He was active in 1977 through 1978. Chase killed 6 people in Sacramento, California. He was schizophrenic. He drank victims' blood and he cannibalized their bodies. He believed that it would stop his blood from turning into powder. It was the whole thing. And then who I just talked about, Ed Kemper, who was called the co-ed killer. He was active primarily in the early 1970s, but Kemper murdered 10 people, including his own fucking grandparents, his mother, and female college students. And he became notorious for his brutal methods and dismembering his victims. I briefly discussed Herbert Mullen on the Ed Kemper episode. His killing spree occurred slightly earlier, 1972 to 1973, but Mullen's crime still resonated throughout California in the mid to late 70s. He murdered 13 people in Santa Cruz, claiming voices were telling him to kill people to prevent a massive earthquake. One of the biggest cases to hit California, though, was the Hillside fucking Stranglers. These were cousins. They terrorized Los Angeles between 1977 and 1978. They were abducting, raping, torturing, and killing 10 young girls and women. Their signature was leaving the victim's body on hillsides all around the city. I plan to do an episode on them, but it's important to mention them because in March of 1978, Alcala was questioned about the murders and had to explain where he was every day the hillside murders were committed. And at the time, Alcala was known for his violent behavior and had already been convicted of sexual assault. So that made him a person of interest. Authorities eventually determined that Alcala was not involved in the Hillside Strangling murders, but the true perpetrators were Angelo Buono and Kenneth Bianchi, and they were both arrested and convicted for those crimes. Now, fast forward to June 24th, 1978. Charlotte Lamb, 32, was found murdered in the laundry room of an apartment complex in El Segundo. She was naked. She had been strangled with a lace from one of her shoes. Her head and face show signs of severe beating, and the lace had been used as a garrote. It was tightened so forcefully that it fractured the cartilage around her voice box, thyroid, and epiglottis, and it caused hemorrhaging. Her right breast and right shoulder had abrasions, and there were lacerations on her eye and her genital area, and contusions on her right labia. She had hemorrhaging around her anal rim, indicative of blunt force trauma that could have been caused by a penis or by another object. Now, most of her injuries were inflicted while she was alive. They found sperm in her vaginal area. Although she also had her ears pierced, her earrings were missing. The odd part was that she didn't live in that fucking apartment complex. And shortly after Charlotte's murder, Ellen Hover, in New York, her body was discovered in a shallow grave in North Tarrytown on the Rockefeller estate. And they were able to confirm who she was via dental records, her jewelry, and a beret. Oddly, though, the NYPD Missing Persons Squad received a tip that Alcala liked to watch the sunset from the Hudson River. And eventually they found a pair of women's underwear and a bra. And then in the garden area, that's where they found bones. I hate this dude. February 1979, he attacks again. Monique Hoyt. She was a 15-year-old, persuaded to model for Alcala. He lured her to a secluded area in Riverside County, where he attacked by asking her to lift up her shirt over her head and hitting her with a tree branch. He then raped her. Her immediate thought was to run, but she had some street smarts. So she acted like she was asleep after he knocked her out. He bit her breasts and vaginal area, and she was trying to be quiet. She's like, oh, fuck. And when he sodomized her, she couldn't keep quiet. So he stuffed her t-shirt in her mouth. He choked her until she lost consciousness. She woke up again, and her ankles and wrists were tied with rope. When she looked at Alcala, he was crying. She pretended to be interested in him, and this seemed to work. She asked him if he was okay, but he didn't answer. She pleaded with him to not tell anyone what happened. Then she asked, could I stay at your house? Could we go together? The girl did well. Her plan worked. She put her clothes back on, and they both walked to his fucking car. Now, unlike many other victims, Hoyt survived. While heading down the mountain, they stopped at an In-N-Out thing and got a pop. That's quote, In-N-Out thing, which I'm assuming is In-N-Out, where they sell those gross burgers. He left her to use the restroom. She said she'd wait. She immediately ran to a motel next door and told them, call the police. They called 911, and within minutes, the police arrived. Alcala sped away. And when they showed her photos, she identified Alcala fucking immediately. The cops found him at his mom's house where he lived. He didn't have an alibi, and he was arrested for rape. But during his interview, which was taped, he claimed that Hoyt had agreed to be photographed and wanted to perform sex acts with him, and she agreed to be tied up. Mind you, This was laid out in a book called Perfect Justice by Don Lasseter, who also wrote the book I read on Charles Ng and Leonard Lake, which is, this type of shit always happens to me. Now, Alcala admitted that he choked her until she was unconscious. And when they asked him why he did that, he said, quote, "You're in an unreasoning situation. Your brain and you just don't know what to do. You're not reasoning. You're not thinking. I raped her." End quote. Prosecutors requested $50,000 bail, but the judge gave him $10,000 bail. And of course, his mother came to his aid and posted the bail. He was out by March 16th. By April, he left the Times. He told them he wanted to open his own photography business and maybe move to Northern California. Now, I believe that this is probably likely a plan, because he probably knew it was coming anyway. Like, they're eventually going to fire me, because he also had trial in September, and he was like most likely preparing to go to trial. On June 13th, 1979, 21-year-old Jill Parenteau, which I would also like to add that is a name that I definitely spell different, but sounds exactly the fucking same, from Charles Ng and Leonard Lake as well. Just, again, one of those weird synchronicity moments. Very strange. Happens on this podcast a lot. Jill Parenteau left work early to attend a Dodgers game with a friend. And when she didn't show up for work the next day, police went to her Burbank apartment and discovered signs of forced entry. 7 glass panes were removed from her window, and the screen had been cut out, basically the size of a human fucking body. And the light bulb in her stairwell was unscrewed. Inside, punctuation's important. Inside, her body was found on the bedroom floor, brutally beaten in the face and the head. Now, Parenteau had severe injuries to her vaginal and rectal areas, along with fingernail scratches, bite marks, and punctures near her breast. She had been strangled with nylons, causing extensive hemorrhaging, again, around the voice box, the thyroid, and the epiglottis. Her naked body had been posed with her legs spread apart, and pillows were used to prop up her shoulders. Investigators took swabs of her genitals and mouth. Her head was so badly beaten that she bled beneath the scalp, and there was bruising on her tongue and internal bleeding in her mouth, consistent with forced oral sex. A week later, June 20th, 1979, Robin Samso, 12, and her friend Bridget Wilvert were hanging off the cliffs in Huntington Beach, sightseeing, when they were approached by Alcala. He had asked to take their pictures. As he was, taking their pictures, a woman in the distance walking the beach spotted them and wondered, why is this grown-ass man taking pictures of these young girls? So she interrupted the shoot. And what are you young ladies doing today? She recognized one of the girls, Bridget, as her neighbor. She interrupted, and she was like, and so Bridget was like, Alcala nervously fucking fumbling, taking his equipment and shit and like running off like a fucking pervert. The man just wanted to take our pictures. So she's like, yeah, you need to get the fuck up out of here. And so they hightail it back to Bridget's apartment. And when they arrive, Robin realized, fuck, late. She had to get to the ballet studio where she had been answering phones and taking ballet classes. She borrowed Bridget's bike and she left. Dana Crapper was a seasonal worker for the U.S. Forestry Service. She was stationed in Los Angeles. They spray fire retardant and shit like that. And on the day Robin Samso disappeared, Dana Crapper was driving through the area when she spotted a Datsun F10 parked at a turnout. She saw a dark-haired man pushing or, quote, forcefully steering a blonde girl toward a dry stream bed. Now, Even though Crappa found the scene unusual, she did absolutely fucking nothing. The next day, while passing the same spot, she saw the same car and noticed what seemed to be the same dark-haired man leaning against a rock. She said his t-shirt was dirty, it was stained, there were dirt under the tires, like, tire marks. Feeling uneasy, but still not taking any fucking action, Dana Crappa didn't report the incident to anyone. 5 days after her first sighting, Dana Crappa returned to the location and discovered the mutilated, unclothed body of a young girl, missing part of her fucking head with her hands and feet severed. So overcome with guilt for not having reported what she said or what she saw, she kept silent again. 4 days after that, Dana fucking Crappa revisited the site and found a pile of clothing, including a tennis shoe, shorts, and a t-shirt. Meanwhile, Alcala is kicking it with his new girlfriend and changing his hair to evade suspicion, as if he didn't murder a child a fucking week ago. The police got a composite drawn. The composite was drawn by Bridget, by Robin Samso's friend. The police got the composite. They started handing it out to news broadcasts. Then calls from people who recognized the composite started fucking rolling in. 2 calls came in from the LAPD Dicks. They had been working on a serial murder. They felt the composite matched one of their suspects. And then they got 2 calls from state parole officers stating that it looked like one of their parolees. They felt like his MO sounded a lot like the guy who they arrested in Riverside for rape. Huntington Beach PD ran a background check and learned his name, Rodney Alcala, and he was a sexual deviant and a fucking pedophile. They got his mugshot. By June 26th, Detective Art Droz was waiting to match the composite to the mugshot. When he finally did, it was very close. Very close. When Art got home that night, he was just chilling, reading the paper, when he heard, well, this.
And welcome to the dating game. And we'll get right underway. It's time to meet our first 3 eligible bachelors for game number 1. And here they are. Good luck, gentlemen. Well, let's see. Bachelor number 1 is a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome.
That was Rodney Alcala. Rodney Alcala joined the popular weekly television show The Dating Game on September 13th, 1978. And just so we're clear, it's September 11th. It's so weird. He was welcomed as one of the contestants by the host, Jim Lang. Now, this was fucking alarming because I don't know if you missed it, but Alcala's kind of in the middle of a fucking murder spree. Art was flipping the fuck out. This motherfucker was on the dating game 9 months before. Art called the detective bureau and told them that Alcala was on TV. No one had called in and said they saw him on TV. They called the producers to pick up the tape. Then finally, on July 2nd, 1979, 12 days after Robin's disappearance, a colleague of Crappa's found, Dana Crappa, remember, found a human skull and bones in the area and alerted the fucking authorities. Again, still not Dana, a colleague of Dana fucking Crappa Crappa. Now, the skull's front lower teeth were smashed, likely from a blow to the mouth. Wild animals had disturbed the remains, making it virtually impossible to actually find the cause of death or if there was sexual assault. A cane-cut kitchen knife was found near the body, and less than a mile away. Robin's beach towel was found covered in blood. One of her tennis shoes, which was personalized, was also found, but no other clothing was recovered. Alcala was identified by 2 girls in the area that had been approached by him on the beach on June 19th. On July 5th, they started watching Alcala's home. The detectives had asked an older lady walking her dog if she could recommend a photographer short notice. She gave them Alcala's name and fucking phone number. By July 6th, the autopsy commenced on Robin's remains, and through dental records, they were able to positively identify Robin Christine Samso. By July 8th, Alcala was trying to get out of fucking Dodge. He and his girlfriend were looking to move to Dallas to open a photography shop, so they say. On July 11th, Alcala rented a storage locker in Seattle, Washington. When he returned to California 3 days later, he didn't tell anyone about his trip to Seattle. Instead, he claimed, to his girlfriend that, I had been to Dallas. I went to Dallas. On July 23rd, Alcala told his girlfriend he would be leaving permanently for Dallas the next day. But then he told an acquaintance, I think I'm going to go to Chicago. Now, Alcala was arrested on July 24th, and a search warrant was executed at the home. He shared this home with his mother and her new husband because, after that first attack, it don't seem like that motherfucker ever got another apartment. He always lived with his mama. Police impounded a Datsun F10 registered to Alcala, which contained camera equipment, binoculars, maps, a briefcase with a set of keys. He had also had new carpeting installed in the new Datsun. Rodney Alcala was booked on suspicion and claimed he was at Knott's Berry Farm on June 20th looking for work. His bail was set for $250K this time. They like, we don't want you out. Inside the house, officers found cane-cut kitchen knives. None were missing, though. Photos, handcuffs, magazines, a black wig, a bullwhip, pink panties with black tape on each side, which sounds like he had the panties taped to something, and a receipt for a Seattle storage locker. An officer didn't take the receipt, but he copied the information and left the receipt behind. The receipt was dated after Samso's disappearance. And when they returned the next day to seize the receipt, it was missing because his mother cleaned out his room. His mother probably did that on purpose because she was protecting him during this whole fucking process. And by July 26th, they retrieved a search warrant for the locker and found it was locked with 2 locks. And it was clothing, a coin purse, earrings, specifically a pair of gold rose earrings with a small diamond in the middle and a pair of gold ball earrings with striations on them. These were later confirmed to be Robin's. Marion Fraser explained that after a dangle was lost from one of the pairs, she pinched off the other dangle with nail clippers so that the earrings would match. One box also has 1,700 photos in it, along with negatives and film slides, and one was marked Tolly VA Rape. And the second tape was Ode to New York by John Berger. Alcala was charged with lewd and lascivious acts upon a child under 14, murder, robbery, and kidnapping. He pleaded innocent on all charges. His preliminary hearing was set for August 9th, and he was held without bail and would face trial for the murder of Robin Samso. Remember Crappa? She was interviewed and had been pretty uncooperative. She revealed new details and was visibly upset. Crappa had mentioned a near collision with the Datsun similar to Alcala's on June 21st, parked near the crime scene. She later testified she had seen the same Datsun the evening before, June 20th, near marker 11, and observed a man in Levi's and a t-shirt leading a young girl up a ravine. She would later claim to Detective Droz that she wasn't sure what she saw, or if she thought she saw him. She had also told Droz that when she found the items, including a .22 caliber casing, she picked them up and she threw them away. She was unsure if he was hurting her. Crappa felt uneasy as fuck, but didn't stop. Now, initially, Crappa had placed the June 21st encounter at 10 o'clock to 10:30, but later corrected it to 8 o'clock, 8:30. She was almost certain the man was Alcala. On June 25th, Crappa returned to the scene, found a mutilated body. She saw tire tracks. She didn't report this immediately, but then 4 days later, while working with William Popke, who was her co-worker, she found bones, and she knew they were human. She claimed at the preliminary hearings that the sighting on 29th was the first time she had seen the remains. Then on a subsequent visit, she spotted a shiny object that might have been a knife and noted that the body was now skeletal with missing parts. So Popke later discovered the skull and notified the authorities. So here is my problem. I haven't taken a beat. Let me take a beat. Sip. My problem is the fact that this woman waited so fucking long to actually say that she admit that she saw a body. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing to be scared. Okay, I get it. You lay out, you spray fire retardant. Okay, you're not a fucking emergency responder in a real way. She was also a seasonal employee, but at least call the goddamn police. Okay, you got a dirty nigga on a cliff. There ain't no guarantee that he's up to any good. Most people who fuck around in nature be dirty. But you saw the girl with him, so you said before. You saw him with her, and then you didn't say anything. Then you see him again dirty, and then you don't say anything again. Then you find the body, and then you don't say anything again. Then you see a bunch of shit at the crime scene, and then you don't say anything again. And then it's not until you or your homie and you, or just your homie or whoever the fuck is doing their job, that they run into the decomposed body parts of a fucking child, that you're like, oh, yeah, I saw this a few days ago. Nigga, what? Like, are you retarded? Because part of me was like, maybe she was retarded. Because I do understand being scared. You know, like if you watch true crime, you always know that most documentaries, motherfucker be like, we thought it was a mannequin. It was like, nigga, I never forget, I mentioned this in, I think it was Herbert Baumeister episode, where I was like, it's not a fucking mannequin. Bloomingdale's ain't just dropping off mannequins next to a road. I think I mentioned it too, because during the Black Dahlia investigation, when they found that very terribly mutilated body in the middle of McClurg, what is it? What is that park in LA? Not McClurg. That's in Chicago. Or whatever, where they found that that body in LA in that park, and then it was like, oh, just walking past this half torso thinking that was a fucking mannequin. Like, do you know department stores just drop mannequins off in a field? Just like, who does that? And so I think that that's my issue with this whole situation, is the fact that she so blatantly ignored it. She blatantly ignored it, and she ignored it multiple fucking times. It's almost as if she went back to confirm that she saw what she saw, and she's going to come back. She's going to come back up. Let me continue. But I was just getting increasingly more frustrated with this fucking, this woman, Because at the end of the day, I understand being scared, but that's when you call the fucking police. You know, and I know people are like, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to have to testify. Okay, fine. But at least tell them that after they've done their due diligence. You call the fucking police, y'all. Call the police. Call the police. Tell them what's going on. And then if you decide that you don't want to be involved in testifying and doing all that shit, that is totally your right. But instead, now this woman is forced to deal with the fucking guilt of not saying anything. Not to say that girl would have been alive either way. You know, Robin Samso probably was dead by the time she saw him dirty chilling on the cliff. But ultimately, you know, when you saw her being forcibly lured into a ravine, that's when you probably should have fucking said something. I mean, look at what happened with Tali Shapiro. Tali Shapiro, you had a fucking good Samaritan who had basically fucking saw her, called the police and was like, I don't like this shit. And if it's not a big deal, then my bad, but this shit feel weird. And then he proceeded to just scope out the moment. Or even that woman, Beverly, who interrupted him when he was taking pictures of those girls. Like, when you see some shit, say some shit. And if you don't want to say anything directly to the perpetrator, call somebody that will handle it. Don't just sit there and be like, oh, well, I was just scared. I was just afraid. I just didn't know what to do. Fuck all of that. Because I'm going to tell you right now, your guilt is going to be way worse than you actually being involved in a fucking, you know, actually being involved in a hearing where you got to testify. I promise you. I would rather, I hate to say it like this, but I'm just, you know, obviously saying this as a hypothetical, but I would rather know that I did everything that I could and that girl still died than to know that she died and I kind of watched it play out and I did absolutely fucking nothing. That's some shit. That's some shit that will literally keep you up at night. And it ain't fucking worth it because it keeps this woman up at night. His trial was set for March 6, 1979, right? Because after all of this that was going on, they finally arrest this motherfucker. He's 36 years old. You know, he was going to face trial for Hoyt, the survivor, but she failed to appear. The Superior Court judge allowed the previous crimes to be used as evidence. Me and Kira talked about this and Eileen Warnos. And this was a big deal because they didn't have much to connect him to Samso. And since Crappa was acting like a fucking bubbling idiot, and DNA evidence, even though it was collected, was not advanced enough to connect a suspect to, Crappa was crucial. And the defense would put her through the fucking ringer to discredit her. She admitted that she didn't come forward because she felt guilt for not saying something sooner, and she was fucking terrified. Alcala was convicted in May 1980 and sentenced to death in June. However, the California Supreme Court overturned the verdict in 1984. Quote, the defense concentrated on discrediting Dana Crappa. William Popke testified that just after their first payday as firefighters, he cooked a pizza dinner for Crappa. From their first paycheck, she mentioned she had just had a near accident at Rendezvous Turnout. They received their first checks on June 13th or 14th, and June 21st was in the middle of a pay period. She never mentioned another accident, and they both agreed that the incident must have occurred during the first 2 weeks of June. Now, under intense cross-examination, Crapp had testified that her extreme reluctance to come forward with her evidence was caused by overwhelming feelings of horror, guilt, denial, and depression. She had described recurring nightmares about the things she had seen. The nightmares were never quite identical in all details. She said, giving rise to some concern that they had confused her actual memory. She wanted to be completely certain of her facts before she revealed them to the authorities. The defense now sought to show that much of Crappa's testimony was confabulated, a product of improper police interrogation methods, which played upon Crappa's confusion and emotional turmoil. Tapes were introduced of extensive interviews conducted separately with Crappa by Detective Droz and Robeson. Defense and prosecution experts gave conflicting views on whether the tape suggested that Crappa had been, quote unquote, brainwashed or otherwise led while in suggestible state to false memory, aka motherfucking hypnosis. The court found that the judge had been improperly informed about Alcala's prior sex crimes, which could have unfairly influenced their decision. Quote, defendant argues that because the valid evidence at trial was legally insufficient to show either premeditated murder or forcible kidnapping, the convictions and special circumstances finding must be set aside, and that further proceedings on the unproved allegations are barred by double jeopardy clause. He also urges that the information must be quashed insofar as it charges kidnapping, since the evidence at his preliminary hearing was insufficient to establish probable cause on that count. We reject both contentions. However, we accept defendant's alternate premise that improper disclosure at trial of his prior crimes may have affected the jury's deliberations. We must therefore reverse the guilt and special circumstance determination. We discuss our reasoning in detail. Alcala was retried in 1986 with a nearly identical case, but this time his testimony about the prior criminal record was excluded. He was convicted again in May 1986, and he was sentenced to death in August. In 1982, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict. Alcala filed a habeas corpus petition. If you don't know what that is, he was arguing that his rights had been violated. Habeas corpus is a legal principle that protects an individual's right to not be lawfully detained or imprisoned. Now, the term habeas corpus is Latin for you shall have the body, referring to the court's order requiring that the person held in custody be brought before a judge to determine whether their detention is lawful. Post-conviction habeas corpus. Now, this is used by individuals who have been convicted and are serving a sentence. It allows them to challenge their conviction or sentence based on issues such as violations of constitutional rights, ineffective assistance of counsel, or new evidence that could exonerate them. In 2001, the U.S. District Court judge granted the petition. They overturned his conviction. And in 2001, the decision was upheld in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2003. The 2001 decision, was upheld in 2003. Now, part of the reason of that was that they were not allowed to testify. A very key witness was not allowed to testify to support his claim that Crappa had been, quote, hypnotized by police investigators. But enter stage left, DNA. In the 2000s, as DNA technology gets more advanced and authorities are like re-examining all these fucking cases, including Alcala's fucking cold cases. In 2003, Alcala's DNA was matched with semen left at the scenes of 2 murders, including Samso's, then 4 in 2004, Barkham, Wickstead, Lamb. Her earring was also found in the locker, and Parento. Yes, they got his ass with DNA, but it took a while. This prick then decided to write a book called You, the Jury. It was published in 2013. The book presents Alcala's own perspective of his legal battles, because there was more to this, right? Like during this time, he had also been dealing with like jailhouse snitches, people who were trying to, get their sentences reduced by saying they were having conversations with him. Don't get me wrong, the case kind of got murky as fuck. He then had like lawsuits because they, refused to provide him like a low fat diet and shit, but the problem is they had taken a lot of samples. And even though they had taken the samples, like I said before, they didn't really have the technology to match his DNA to anything, but they were just taking these specimens. And so what they did was, since all this shit is on Alcala anyway, and we now have this technology that is legal to use in court, let's see if we can match him to what we say he did. Okay. Now, in that book, he kind of gets in deep about his quote unquote innocence, which I'm like, nigga, please. He provides his version of the events. He criticizes the legal system. Every fucking convict does that shit. All of a sudden, it's like, yeah, they probably may be doing some fucked up shit, but you connect it to more shit than they even know. So don't basically like shut the fuck up. Because sometimes with some people, when it's like you talk too much, that's why they doubling down on your bitch ass. And that's kind of what they did to him, because they discovered those new victims through DNA evidence. And excuse me, one of Alcala's attorneys contested. He says, if you're a juror and you hear one murder case, you may be able to have reasonable doubt, but it's very hard to say you have reasonable doubt on all 5, especially when 4 of the 5 aren't alleged by eyewitnesses, but are proved by DNA matches. In 2006, the California Supreme Court was like, look, we're going to rule in the prosecution's favor. I hate to say it, but DNA don't be lying. Alcala stood trial on 5 charges altogether. Again, this is in 2010. Now, that 3rd trial, he decided to be his own fucking attorney, which is never a good idea. What is that saying, that any man that represents himself has a fool for a client or some shit? That's that guy. Now, I mean, let's just be honest, because yeah, he tried to represent himself. There was even this weird thing too, where like Robin Samso's mom had fucking like brought a gun into the court, and he was I always find it so fucking fascinating. I talked about this before. I think it was the Wineville chicken coop murders when me and Kira talked about this last season, where I was like, what is always so infuriated about people that act as their own attorney is that they present their case and then they bring in all these motherfuckers to have this conversation. It's like, me as the victim's mother, I have no plans on talking to the person that murdered and raped my child. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want him interrogating me. I don't want him asking me no fucking questions. I don't want him, trying to pretend like he's a goddamn lawyer. I don't want none of that. I don't want none of that. And so, his attempt to represent himself was basically him just being like, oh, I mean, I didn't do it. I have an alibi. I was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a job when Sam So was kidnapped. Because remember, he's only being tried, well, in 1979, he was only being tried for the Sam So murder. Those other murders didn't even really come into play until they started connecting him with DNA evidence. And that, was the moment, right? Alcala, when they hit his ass with 4 more charges, he ain't even bother. He was like, I'm fucked. I am fucked. We're talking about after many attempts. Then that same year in 2010, they started hitting his ass with the shit that was going on in New York. Michael Crilly that he killed in Yorkville, Hover that he killed. And the Manhattan grand jury, they indicted his ass in January 2011. In 2012, he was extradited to New York. Of course, he tried to plead not guilty. Then in December 2012, he changed both of them. And he was like, I just want to go back to California. And his plan was to pursue those appeals because in New York, he wasn't going to get sentenced for death because the death penalty wasn't even an option. And so with him, he's like, I'm just gonna try to like appeal all the death convictions that I got in California. Then on January 7th, 2013, Manhattan judge sentenced Alcala to an additional 25 years to fucking life. And on the anniversary of when he was apprehended in 1979, July 24th, Alcala died in Corcoran, California in 2021. That motherfucker died 3 years ago. He was 77 years old. Yep. And that is the story of Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. I don't got much to say about this piece of shit. You probably wondering, well, what the psychiatrists say about him? Because that was part of it for me too. Was like, what was his thing? Like, what was his psychological profile? He was definitely narcissistic. He was incredibly manipulative. I mean, Alcala, he was very consistent with narcissistic personality disorder because he was incredibly manipulative. He was super charming. He wasn't a bad looking guy. His intellect kind of put him in spaces where he could be trusted by a lot of his victims. You can see that on The Dating Game, which I'm going to link in the show notes. If you want to see the video of Rodney Alcala in The Dating Game in 1978. I mean, he made himself out to be this very charismatic, kind of like sexy, almost like dangerously sexy. There's parts of it where he's like growling at the contestant and like all that type of shit. And it's things like that where it's like, okay, that would be hot if you weren't a dangerous murdering psychopath. The psychology is interesting because he was definitely a psychopath. He lacked empathy. His violence was very, very sadistic, and it was very, very aggressive. It is incredibly hard to tell what his issue really was. Because even when I went back and I was like, well, what's his story? Like, what's the deal with his mom, or what's the deal with his dad? Like, I really wasn't picking up where he would have got these issues from. Like, I just feel like it's a chemical thing. It's just how his brain was wired. He had a control thing. He was satisfied with exerting control and causing suffering. I mean, he was a sadist. He did seem to also have like multiple personalities a little bit, especially when they had asked him about when he was pretending to be John Berger, and they had asked him about Rodney Alcala, and he was like, don't talk to me about what Rod Alcala did. Like, you know what I mean? It was like, okay, but his background, even as a photographer, was used to disarm people, and it was very manipulative. Then you got the sexual deviance, like his sexual deviant behavior. When you look at the description of what he did to the bodies, like the forced oral copulation, the forced anal sex, and just the because I've heard of these things in other cases that I've done, but very rarely do I feel like I've heard about things like hemorrhaging in the mouth and tongue bruise. Like, that is indicative of somebody who just was full steam ahead, didn't fucking stop. Like, this dude was incredibly brutal. And I was talking to one of my coworkers today because I was like, I find it incredibly fascinating that he's not one of those people that is always examined. Like, where the documentaries at on this man, other than like a couple of episodes on Investigation Discovery or some shit. Where is the 5-part series? You know, they did it on Richard Ramirez and the Times Square Killer, and you know, they do shit like this on the Zodiac Killer and the Hillside Strangler. They did a documentary on the motherfucking Grim Sleeper. They do things like all the time on people like this, but it's very interesting that out of all documentaries I see, I ain't never seen nothing on Rodney Alcala. And so that's what kind of piqued my interest in wanting to examine this, because I had heard about it, because I had heard about the dating game thing, but it's just interesting. And I think what's also fascinating about this whole thing is that when Rodney Alcala died in 2001, Morgan Rowan, she contacted Steve Hodel. And he was obviously one of the investigators of Tali Shapiro's case. And she was like 68. So it was, you know, she's an older woman now. And she claimed that she was in Hollywood or whatever, and she was approached by him at a nightclub on the Sunset Strip, and she got in his car and they were driving to IHOP, which I'm like, please tell me it's not the IHOP I used to go to in Hollywood, because that's wild as fuck. But Alcala had like drove to his apartment, and when he of course he was like, oh, you know, we're having a party. And when they got there, he dragged her into his bedroom and then like beat her and like raped her. It was just like this whole wild ass fucking story. And that was when she was like 16. And her friends had kind of rescued her, and he had like broke out of the room through a window. When I read that in a book, I was like, oh, okay, yeah. It's almost like when I was reading the book, you can see the escalation, right? Like you could see the practicing, like him getting better at it, you know? And there were other victims. There were obviously more women in pictures that they found in a storage unit and things like that. So there's really no telling how many victims he truly had. I think it's, you know, it's always hard to tell. By the time you get to the one killing that you may be going to trial for, I mean, there's technically only 8 confirmed, but they think there's possibly over 100, because he was doing this shit for almost 10 years undetected. Not to mention the fact that the judicial system kept putting his bitch ass back on the street every 5 minutes. It's like, oh, well, then he could just pay to get out, and then he just gets back on the street. Oh, he just did it, and then he's just back on the street, just out there raping and murdering people. You know, it's just like, I wonder how many unsolved cases we know of or we've heard of from like cold case files or like forensic files or some shit that was like actually committed by Rod Alcala, you know? So hope you learned something. I'm sorry I did this to you. I'm so very sorry. I hope you like the Old Cuban. He wasn't Cuban, but he was an old Mexican by the time he died in fucking prison. I hate when sometimes they die from like natural causes and shit. I be wanting them to get beat the fuck up by somebody, you know? So I hope you all enjoyed this season. If you don't remember this season, please go back. Please go back and listen to more or older episodes or whatever. You know, that don't really bother me so much if you do that. And I will see you all for Halloween. How about that? How about we do that? And then, oh my God, you already know this room makes my nose itch. I I just looked at something. It says that on November 3rd, 2022, a 3-part television documentary was done on Alcala. Huh. I wonder what it's called. Because they don't have a name of what it was called. That's kind of interesting. So, yeah, check that out if you find it. Because I don't know what the fuck that is. Because I was like looking for documentaries and I only found one episode. It was an Investigation Discovery episode that came out in 2017. I don't know about no Netflix documentary, but maybe you all can put me on game. If you find... I guess I can Google it. You don't have to message me. But if you want to follow me, go follow me at Sting Like a Bee on TikTok, Sweater Drunk Podcast on Instagram. Sting Like a Bee is my personal Instagram. And follow the podcast if you want. I'll update episodes there. Next season, I do have plans, like I said before, and I really, really hope that they work out. So I'm not going to tease them too much, but we gonna try to do something different, a little different next year. Okay. And thank you. Seriously. Thank you again. I appreciate you all for joining me. And I hope you enjoyed season 2 of us. I swear to drunk, I am not God. Peace.